My name is Leonard Franklin Carter, Lenny to the boys who made it home, Mr. Carter to the neighbors, and Lolo Len to the granddaughter who set this little tape recorder on my coffee table. I'm 98 years old as I say this, though my knees feel older when the rain moves in. Back in 1944, I was a U.S. Army technician 5th grade, a radioman and field repair type, attached to a small team working with Filipino guerrillas on Luzon. I wasn't a hero, just a man who could keep a set alive in weather that drowned mules and who learned to keep his boots quiet in the paddies. I've told the clean stories, the ones about baseball games on borrowed diamonds and rice shared under a roof that somehow never leaked where the lamp hung. What I haven't told, not in so many words, is the other part. The nights when sound meant more than sight, when we counted doorposts and tapped iron because it settled a room, and when something in those jungles learned our names and tried them on like jackets. This isn't a sermon and it's not a ghost story. It's a straight account from an old man whose memory is better on the nights he hears frogs stop singing all at once. I'll tell it as we lived it. The rain, the countersigns, the small protections people just do, and the thing we fought that the war never taught us how to fight. If you're still with me, let me take you back to one particular night on Luzon, 1944. The first time somebody used my full name outside that nipa hut, the night was holding its breath. We were 3 men inside, plus 2 of the barrio's young watchmen on the step, and a kerosene lamp pinned the bamboo ribs to honey color. Out past the banana leaves, rain whispered like a voice trying not to wake a sleeping child. Sergeant Whitaker had the countersign in his pocket, written on a damp scrap of paper that he folded once and tucked into his helmet band. Every hour, we changed it. Every hour, someone died within walking distance anyway. Leonard Franklin Carter, a voice called from the dark, as smooth as a letter read out loud. "Radio man? That you in there?" I was sitting on a crate with my back to the wall, the hand microphone cupped in my palm like a bird. Hearing my name in that night was like hearing your mother's voice in a foxhole. Every hair on my arms rose. Whitaker's eyes cut to me. He shook his head once, small and slow. "Don't answer." On the step, Tomas and Lido kept their mouths shut and their eyes level, one hand each on the door bar. The lamp scrawled a line of light across Tomas's cheek, caught the sweat there, made his jaw look hard as carved wood. Beyond the hut, the frogs that had been clattering in the paddies went quiet, as if someone put a lid on a pot. "Advance and be recognized," Whitaker said, voice low, the sound buried under the roof's dripping. "Countersign. Daisy," the voice returned, too quick, too sure. Whitaker's mouth thinned. The word he had was not Daisy. He waited. A Japanese patrol had ghosted through half an hour earlier. 5 silhouettes and one whispered word we all knew in every tongue. Halt. We'd felt them like the cold end of a rifle against a spine, and let them pass, breath by breath, praying our lamp didn't leak out under the slats. "Daisy," the voice said again, off by half a heartbeat, like a phonograph that needed a push. I could hear the weight of it in the mud, not right, like boots that remembered the sound but not the weight. Leaf rush stops. "Wrong house," Whitaker said. "Move along." He did not call anyone by name. He did not say my rank. He did not give it any handholds. The step creaked. Tomas quietly slid a dish to the sill, a little plate of rice his mother had set out because that is what she did when the old stories pricked her fingertips. Lido, for his part, touched the iron bar, tap, tap, near the hinge, like you might touch the cross on a chain without thinking. Whitaker pretended not to see either thing, because men at war will take any luck that does not make noise about being luck. "Leonard," the voice tried again. "Lenny, Franklin, Carter." It lined my name up wrong, like it had it written on a hand and was reading it while walking. "Stay still," Whitaker breathed. He unbuttoned his poncho flap just enough for his hand to slip to the carbine laid across his knees. My hand strayed to the little cloth pouch where I kept our salt tablets. Not because I thought to eat them. "Sergeant," I whispered. "Patrol." I lifted 2 fingers, then 3, then flattened my palm, the sign we'd worked out with the guerrillas for distance. Close, closer. Outside, something scritched along the wall. It made the sound of a belt snapping against itself. The voice said my name again, and the rain slackened as if listening. "Countersign," Whitaker repeated, louder. This time the voice got it almost right. Chain. Whitaker stared at me long enough for me to know what he was thinking. When you are the man with the radio, you become valuable in a way that makes you a target. He put 2 fingers against the lamp's glass, winced at the heat, and whispered, "Kill it." I leaned and lifted the chimney with a piece of bent wire. The flame made a sound like a small animal folding up. Darkness came down all at once, the hut going from kitchen to cave. In the roof, geckos clicked. The watchman on the step did not breathe at all. On the far side of the patties, metal scraped metal. It could have been a bayonet scabbard. It could have been a farmer's shovel. It could have been a thing teaching itself to make that sound. I learned there are things the war never taught us to fight. You don't get many clean beginnings in a war. Mine was a gray afternoon on Luzon in '44, when our little team came over from the coast by truck and foot, each of us shaped by long months and bad chow into versions of ourselves that were good at not dying and not very good at anything else. I was a technician 5th grade, which meant I was the fellow people yelled for when the set went quiet, or the generator coughed water instead of spark. My set that week was a backpack job we'd picked up from supply with a handle that had been repaired with a strip of GI belt. I could keep it dry in rain that would drown a mule if you gave me enough canvas. We linked up with the local guerrillas at a safe house with walls of woven bamboo and a roof like a sleeping carabao's back. There were hens under the floor and a pile of firewood stacked under the eaves in neat cords a soldier could respect. The leader was a man named Isco Mercado, whose voice could get up and fill a room when it needed to, and who otherwise spoke with the careful quiet of a hunter. He shook our hands like he aimed to keep them. He called us kapatid, brothers, and said it so we believed him. With me were Sergeant Bill Whitaker, an Ohio farm boy who had learned to make his voice calm when other people's voices weren't, Corporal Eddie Doyle, who had a laugh like the click of a lighter, and Doc, meaning our medic, a Mexican-American from El Paso named Ruiz, who carried himself like a man who had already promised saints whatever saints wanted as long as his hands stayed steady. Isco's men were younger than any of us, except maybe Doyle. Tomas, the watchman from the hut, had a bolo that he honed every night with his thumb touching the blade as if he couldn't bear to look down at it. Lito was his cousin, eyes that could find the darkest stitch in a night and pick it out by feel. That afternoon, they taught us the track that ran from the safe house to a paddy dike that made a drier line across the land, and from there to a little cluster of nipa huts on stilts where we would sleep in turns. They showed us how to step on the grass just beside the mud, how to set your foot so the water would suck between your toes without making a slap. They showed us the way each house hid its light in a woven shade so it didn't look like a square of American sky to a man with binoculars. There were habits the villagers had that didn't line up with any manual we'd ever been given, habits that I learned without exactly deciding to, and that I kept up when nobody was looking. A finger tap twice against the door bar when you went out, a little salt, shocking and clean, flicked off a fingertip before stepping over a sill. A pot on the coals, even when nobody planned to cook, sending up a lazy braid of coconut oil smoke that smelled like a cross between sweetness and ration tin. Nobody explained those things to us, and we didn't ask, because asking meant saying out loud what we weren't ready to say. We were soldiers, we had a purpose and a commander, and a map with lines on it. The barrio had silence, and that was its way of keeping daylight alive a little longer into the night. The first hint that something in these parts knew our names came on the second night, when I was on the step with Tomas, while Whitaker and Isco went to check the eastern approach, and Doyle fidgeted with cards by himself, trying to beat a ghost of his own invention. The rain had given up for a few hours, and the frogs were singing as if they were being paid by the note. Geckos patrolled the rafters with the regular click-click of teeth on chitin. Out past the fence, the paddies breathed their sky back to the stars. "Your radio," Tomas said, nodding to the set, which sat just inside the door, wrapped in my poncho like a sleeping child. "Is too loud." "It's off," I said. He shook his head. "Not that. Its name." "It doesn't have a name," I said, and he let that go the way a man will when he decides your ignorance is kinder than the truth would be. We were about to change the countersign. Whitaker wanted English words that wouldn't roll off the tongue of a man who didn't use the language much, which meant nonsense pairs that sounded to me like a schoolyard rhyme: huckleberry fence, parlor, knock, dainty gourd. You could tell how tired we were by how silly the pair got. That night, something out in the upland bamboo thickets said parlor with the British spelling. Not a joke, not a lark, just a small wrongness, like a pebble in your boot you don't want to stop and fix because you know if you sit down you're never getting up again. Doyle sat up from his cards and said, "Hear that?" His voice had the crackle of a match to it, like he might strike and strike until something caught. I nodded without taking my eyes off the dark. Yeah. Tomas slid something along the step with his foot, one of those little rice dishes people used here to say both thank you and please. He did it like you might slide a note across a desk to a teacher you didn't want to read your handwriting. There was a lantern across the track. I could see it through the leaves, a little bullseye of light where there should have been nothing. It had the look of a fisherman's lamp, and that was wrong here, because there was no river where a man would set a net and sit with his thoughts. The light didn't blink. It didn't pull moths. It was as steady as something painted on black paper with a dot of cream. "Bill," I called under my breath. The name felt big in my mouth, too big to let out. I called anyway, because that is what you do in a team. You throw your voice through the dark and hope it lands where it's supposed to. Silence came back, the kind of silence that builds walls around a house. Then, from the side opposite the lamp, Whitaker's voice, "Carter, countersign." I said the answer. My voice came out dry as a biscuit, gored. From two different places, the return. One said it right, one said guard. One was Whitaker, or whoever had borrowed him for the night, and one was not. "Inside," Tomas breathed, and I didn't argue. The step complained. The door bar slid home with a sound like a small tree giving up in wind. We darkened the lamp and watched the space where it had been as if the shape of the flame would come back without it. The wrong voice tried names. It tried mine. It tried Whitaker's. It tried Isco's and got it even more sideways than the others. Then it did something that chilled us worse than any wind. It called a Filipino name we had not taught it. It said Ramon, and I saw Isco flinch like a bird had flown into his chest. He reached down and touched the iron ring of the door bar the way you might hold a friend's hand. "Don't answer," he said. "Not to us, but to something in the night. There are predators you learn the first time you see them. Wolves, tigers, even men. They have a weight to them that the ground knows. But there are things that learn you, and that was what made the hair on my arm stand up and stay up. Whatever was out there was counting us, was matching our pauses, trying on our words like uniforms in a mirror. We were not just worrying about what walked wrong. The Imperial patrols were constant, and if you have never been hunted by a man whose job it is to find you, you might not appreciate how much the little things weigh on you. How you hold your canteen differently so it won't knock your belt buckle. How you slide your bootlace knot to the inside so it won't snag. How you swallow your cough into your sleeve until it burns. We set an ambush on the third evening for a supply runner who was supposed to pass the dike with a satchel of coded lists. We had good intelligence and a better angle. We smeared mud on faces and wrists, layered our breaths under the grain's breeze, and told jokes in our heads so our mouths wouldn't ask to grin at the wrong time. Boots in mud. The frogs stopped. All of them. It was like a hand pressed over a choir's mouth. I felt Doyle stiffen beside me and put a hand on his ankle so softly I might have been patting a dog. Wait. A shape slid along the dike to our right, broad in the shoulders. It stopped where the land narrowed and set a lantern down. The light made a little dish on the mud. It burned cold. No shimmer, no wick shadow. It was like the idea of light, detached from everything that makes light real. On the left, footsteps. Too heavy, then too light, like somebody was thinking about how much a boot should weigh. They got close enough that I could have grabbed fabric if I'd wanted to be the first man to die that day. They paused. I smelled food, good food in a place that had been nothing but boiled rice and canned meat lately, stewed eggplant with coconut milk, grilled fish. Clean. Too clean. Food that should have been carried hot from a kitchen was offering itself under rain without smoke. Isco whispered a word that meant don't. He didn't mean the ambush. He meant that dish for a mouth that never wanted you to look at its teeth. Then, from behind us, where no one living should have been, came my own voice, whispering, now. The cadence was mine down to the scrape I get in dry air. Every muscle in my body tried to obey. It is a strange thing to hold yourself when you hear an order you recognize, and the man who would give it is kneeling in the mud at your side. Safe, Isco breathed so close to my ear it felt like he moved my jaw with his. That was the word we'd agreed upon when something in the night tried to pull our strings. Safe meant wait for a human throat. A shape stepped into the lamp's pretend glow. It looked like a man in the war, which is to say it could have been anyone up close and nobody at a distance. Doyle breathed in sharply through his teeth. I squeezed his ankle till he had to make a sound or kick me, and he chose sound. A tiny, barely there hiss that, had a patrol been on top of us, would have been the end of the story. The supply runner never came. Whether he'd been warned or taken, or whether we were in the wrong place, I don't know. What I do know is that just before dawn, a shout went up from the paddies a kilometer south. Japanese voices, tense and fast. We held tight and heard the sort of sounds a body makes when it's moved slowly by someone who knows how to keep it from announcing itself. At first light, we found drag marks and 4 sets of prints that went to nothing at a threshold of churned mud and stopped there like the men had been lifted into a tree and taken away by the wind. We didn't write any of that in our report. We recorded movement of enemy unit, possible engagement, unknown losses, and we underlined unknown until the pencil tore the paper. The barrio began to do things more openly that had been happening quietly before. Women swept the paths at dusk not to clean them, but to smooth them, so footprints would tell tales without asking questions. The men fixed nails, ironed, bent, and reused 40 times in door frames. Someone tied a strip of red cloth to the post that marked the edge of the safe house clearing. It fluttered like a tongue telling someone to mind their manners. I took up a habit of my own, and I won't pretend it was anything but superstition, no matter how much sense it made when I told it to myself. Before crossing a boundary, a gate, a threshold, a line of churned dirt between paddies, I counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, under my breath. Not 4. Do not end on 4, 5, 6, hand on my belt buckle. Touch the metal, then step. Soldiers have rituals. They are a way of making decisions in a world where decisions often don't have the weight of right or wrong, but only of more or less dead. Doyle laughed at me for it once, at noon with flies worrying our ears and nothing in the shadows but heat. "You're turning Catholic on me, Carter," he said with a grin, then made the sign of the cross with a cigarette, just to show he wasn't entirely immune either. We were moving a wounded farmer that afternoon. He'd slipped with a sack of rice and gashed his shin on a hidden bit of rebar, junk left by a bridge the occupiers had started and not finished. The cut was clean and deep. We put him on a stretcher like we'd done 100 times, Ruiz at the head, me at the foot, and we took the path that dodged the worst of the mud. Halfway to the safe house, the stretcher got lighter. Not a lot, just a handful of pounds, like when a man shifts and starts to carry his share with his hands on the rails. I thought maybe the farmer had found his breath and pushed up, and then I felt it go heavy again, then light again. Ruiz looked back at me with a question he didn't have the breath to ask. "Hold," Isco said, quiet, and we set the stretcher down in the middle of the track. The farmer's eyes were closed, his face like clay, his chest rose and fell. The stretcher itself, a canvas rig with bamboo poles, looked normal. Ruiz slid his hands under the head brace. He grimaced. "Cold," he whispered. "Not wet cold. Not rain cold. Cold like a cellar where no sun has ever been." We lifted again. The weight righted itself. It stayed right for a dozen paces and then began to drift. Ruiz said a word in Spanish that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with saints who walk with knives hidden in their hems. By the time we got the farmer into the safe house and laid him on a pallet beside the stove, our arms were shaking not from exertion, but from the way your muscles complain when your mind fights your own instincts. That night, the frogs stopped again. The lamp on the far path burned its clean, cold burn. And a voice outside the door said in perfect English, "Doc Ruiz, we need you at the East Ditch." I looked at Ruiz. He looked at me. Neither of us moved. The voice got impatient, which was the first honest thing it had done since we came. "He's bleeding." "Nobody calls me Doc like that," Ruiz said, more to himself than to me. "Not out here." He touched the iron ring on the bar. He was not a man for these gestures. It surprised me enough to forget my fear for half a second. Then I listened to the frogs not singing and remembered. In the morning there were drag marks by the East Ditch that belonged to nothing I could name. There were also 2 sets of human prints, one with the neat, heel-heavy press of canvas boots, one with the long and soft step of a man in sandals carrying a weight he had not meant to take on. The official enemy had no interest in our troubles. They had their own, which we provided, and that kept the line between us in a place I knew how to hold. Late that week, we heard a patrol cutting cross-country, not on the road we watched, but coming in on a bearing that would take them through a stand of bamboo and out behind the schoolhouse. We did not have the numbers to engage. We notified Isco's outpost with a short burst of static and a code word that meant drift away like smoke. Then we hunkered and listened, and hoped the patrol would decide nothing was here but hungry men and wet feet. I have to say the thing plainly so I won't be tempted to make a campfire tale of it. We heard the patrol cry out in fear, not in pain. We heard a sound like a hand closing over a mouth. We heard the bamboo knock like knocked knuckles. We heard a voice call a name, my name, wrongly, as if I were part of their squad and had gone missing. We did not move. We did not engage. We did not whisper, because even breath has its own color in the dark, and that night the dark was painting in thick strokes. At first light we found them because we had to. 2 men, one on his back, eyes open to a sky that did not care for him one way or the other, one face down, hat off, and lying a neat foot away as if set there by a careful hand. No gore, no tearing, no sign of rifle fire. Their belts were still buckled, their bayonets were sheathed, their canteens sat where they should sit. It was as if they had been picked up by cousins, laid down on the earth, and told to sleep a while. Isco stood with his hands behind his back and said nothing for a very long time. Then he went to the edge of the clearing and lit a pot on a low coal, the smell of coconut oil lifting like a veil. He nodded to Tomas, who came with a box of coarse salt. They stood a good distance away and sprinkled a line in the dirt without making a ceremony of it. If you asked me even now why it mattered, I would only tell you that it felt like closing a gate after a horse bolted and watching the horse stop anyway, because gates are a language animals understand even when the rider is wrong. "Do we bury them?" Doyle asked. Whitaker squared his shoulders and set his jaw. "We mark them," he said. "We let their people come for them if they can. We don't make more trouble than we already have." He took off his helmet as he said it, as if he were in church. Doyle followed suit. We did not speak then about the idea that the thing that walked at night might not draw distinctions any better than men do when they're scared. We left a note of sorts the way the farmers did. 3 stones stacked just so at the path's edge, the top one a flat oval that looked like nothing to a man who didn't know what it meant, and would read like a shouted word to one who did. It meant, as near as I understood, "Go gently. There has already been enough." The midpoint of all this, the fulcrum the rest of my life sat on, came not with a fight, but with a footprint. We had set boundaries around the clearing with our own intentions, posts smoother than they should be because hands had run over them in the night, a ring of stamped earth where men paced to keep from sleeping, a line of iron scraps Tomas insisted on hanging from the eaves to clink against the bamboo in the wind. That morning, it had rained so hard, the roof spattered like a drum. When the rain eased, we walked the lines the way you count the men in your squad without making a parade of it. At the far side of the clearing, just shy of the first post, a set of prints stopped. They came out of the mud from nothing, tracked with clear edges towards the post, and stopped a boot length from the place the men had salted 2 nights before. The toes dug in a little, like a child deciding whether to step over a crack in a sidewalk. Then nothing, no heel, no stride away, just the mark of hesitation and a blank where a body should have gone. "Could be a trick," Doyle said. He sounded like a man telling a joke at a funeral because the air demanded something you couldn't give it. "Could be," I said. Ruiz crouched and put his fingers near the print. He did not touch it. He looked up at me and said, "Quiet. This one's mine." He meant the weight of it, the way a medic comes to understand the heft of a man on a litter. It knows your name and it knows mine. We found a lantern hung in a tree later that day, one of those fisherman's lanterns that throws a narrow light. It had no soot on the glass. The handle was cold. I put my palm to it and waited for that little sting that says heat is stored in metal. Nothing. It shone bright as any flame and made no warmth at all. Ruiz crossed himself in a way that looked like a man setting a straightedge on paper. Isco took the lantern down, turned it upside down, and poured what should have been oil into the dirt. It hit the ground with no wet spot. I can't explain that without making myself sound like a liar, so I won't try. That is what happened. It is the truth as I have it. That night, someone stood outside the safe house door and called my rank and serial number from 20 degrees off our eastern flank where the path did not run. Technician 5th grade Carter, 3810796. The numbers came like beads on a string. They were right. The voice was wrong in two separate ways at once. It was mine and Whitaker's welded, and it came from a height too close to the ground. Doyle threw up in a bucket as silently as a man can. Tomas, brave as stone, tapped the iron ring with 2 fingers and then set his hand on the door bar and started to count under his breath. Not the kind of counting you do in front of strangers. The kind of counting your father taught you and his father taught him for walking home late when dogs wander and your shadow stretches long. We decided then, not because a manual told us to, but because the night did, that if it could count, we would make it count wrong. We set our posts at odd intervals. We changed the countersign twice in 1 hour. We wore each other's helmets and swapped places on the step. And when someone brought us a basket well after dark with fish that smelled sweet as if it had been pulled from a river at noon, we left it outside until morning and found it full of water and pine needles with no fish at all. The creature, the feeder, the mouth that walked, whatever name you want for something you dare not give one, made a mistake. It moved a lamp, not ours, the one it had hung like bait. It did it while 2 of Isco's boys were in the trees above it, and Tomas saw the way it lifted the light without the hand that should have been attached to the arm that should have been attached to a man. He did not shoot. He did not cry out. He watched because some part of him was as curious as he was afraid, and later he told us with his hands, drawing the path of something around the lamp as if the darkness itself had fingers. That same night, a thin Japanese soldier, no older than Doyle, came into the edge of the clearing with both hands up and a face like a boy caught stealing bread. He tried a word in English and failed, and tried one in Tagalog and failed, and then he said in the careful language of a man who learned it from a book, "Please, water." His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth on the second syllable. Whitaker gave him water, because war or no war, a man asks like that and you help him. He drank like his nerves had been scraped raw. He looked at the lantern hung under the eaves, and then away, quick, as if watching something walk across a mirror. He set his water tin down and lifted both hands again, showing us he had no weapon in them, and then he held them closer than a man would when he's truly relaxed. His eyes went to the posts at the edge of the clearing. He counted them, lips moving. I know what that looks like now, because I have seen it in my own reflection since. He told us in pieces, half Japanese, half English, half the mountain language that Isco's uncle spoke, that men were missing from his squad after a night watch. He'd been sent to ask the barrio for help, finding 2 who had wandered off after someone called them by name from beyond the ditch. He used the word for ghost that any Catholic would throw at a story like that, and then he shook his head and said a word that meant something with teeth. We did not bring him inside. That would have been too much to ask of the old women in the kitchen. We gave him a stool under the eaves and salted the sill where he sat. He didn't look surprised. If you want a measure of what the world has taught you, watch what you don't find strange anymore. Just before dawn, we walked with him to the place his men had stood. The fog lay low enough that when you spoke, you saw your words drift along the ground like breath. We found the same marks we'd seen near the schoolhouse. Impressions of weight that made the mud think of a man, and then vanish as if thought were stronger than gravity. We found a helmet strap caught on a root. We found a boot print that stopped at a threshold like it had reached out with its toes, and then changed its mind because the counted edge did not match what it expected. We found, at last, a small pile of earth where someone had smoothed over the impression a knee leaves when a body kneels to pray. The soldier from the other side swallowed and set the heel of his palm against his forehead like a man taking his temperature. He nodded once. He was no longer asking for our help in finding his men. He was acknowledging a communion none of us wanted. The fight came because fights come. You can set your boundary lines and count until your numbers go soft, but the night will come to you anyway. It came at the safe house because the kitchen was the only room big enough to hold everything we had left, and that made it a magnet for trouble. It started with water offered too late. A woman from the next hut stepped onto the path with a jar at the hour when you would never fetch water unless the world's rules had changed. Her bare feet made no sound. The jar was wrapped in cloth that should have been damp and was not. The frogs, who had been taking their chorus seriously, went out like a match pinched between finger and thumb. "Back," Isco said. He did not point. He did not raise his voice. The woman stopped, jerked once, then moved backward without turning around. Ruiz had his hand on the door bar, his left hand finding the iron ring as if it had lived there all his life. Doyle gripped the carbine he barely trusted, and Whitaker sat with his back to the stove, counting. I could hear him under everything. 1, 2, 3, not 4, 5, 6, 7, the small tap of his wedding ring against the stock when his hand shifted. Then the other sound came, the one that lives in my teeth when I dream. A weight set down where nothing should have been. It is like the sound a horse makes when it shifts its hips, only with no hide, no breath. The lantern on the shelf behind me hissed. The room pulled in around it, the way men close ranks when someone lobs a question they don't care to answer. "Daisy," a voice said from just left of the window. It was Whitaker's voice, patient. The window was a wall of woven bamboo. Whitaker was not there. "Chain," a voice said from just right of the door. It was mine. I was 3 feet away, behind a stack of ration tins, holding my breath. "Safe," Isco said like a bell. The word went through us and did the work of 3 commands. It hit the line we'd salted that afternoon like a stick hits a fence. I felt the hair on my forearms lift at once, the way they do when a storm puts its hand over your heart. Something pushed at the door and the bar held. Something scraped along the eaves and the iron nails rang like chimes. "On my count," Whitaker said, not loud, not like a movie sergeant, just like a man making numbers so he doesn't forget how to speak. 3. The smoke pot Ruiz had lit after supper was still warm, a low pan with the scrapings of coconut oil and rice chaff in it. Isco nudged it with his boot. It coughed and sent up a ribbon of smoke that smelled like the inside of a bakery in a town where you were still allowed to live. The ribbon slid toward the door, then away, like a cat reconsidering a lap. 2. Doyle's bolt clicked. It sounded too big. I felt useless, and then I remembered I was the man who kept the set alive. I reached behind me and found the metal case and set my hand on it like a heart. The idea came not from a manual, but from the way old men slap iron-raked teeth with a laugh when lightning trips their fence. I tapped the metal. Tap, tap. I did it again. Tap. The house settled around me like men bracing their boots in mud. 1. We moved as one body, bar up, door a hand's width, smoke pushed hard with a woven fan. Whitaker's carbine leaned into the small opening like a man sniffing a stew to see if it's turned. A shadow crossed the gap where the door hung. It was not a man. It was a bend in the night like a shoulder where no shoulder should fit. The smell that came in was not rot. It was fresh, and that was worse somehow. Bananas just cut, rice just steamed, fish just flipped, perfect and cold as the lantern in the tree. "Fire," Whitaker said. The shots were disciplined, not a volley that would bring the district down on us. 2 from the carbine, 1 from the pistol that Ruiz kept for snakes and men. The smoke went out the door in a flat sheet. The shadow moved wrong and was suddenly at the window, which was not a window you could fit through unless you didn't mind bleeding. It did not bleed. It pressed against the woven wall until the bamboo creaked and the pattern made an imprint in the dark shape like the weave had been stitched onto it. "Countersign," the shape said in Doyle's voice from the roof above us, and I heard the panic start to gnaw at the steady part of him. "Say it." "Safe," Isco said again, because some words are not passwords. They are spells you cast with your whole life. It came down across the doorway like a line taken too fast off a spool. It hit the floor and moved not like feet, but like locks of hair in a current. Ruiz banged the smoke pan hard against the threshold, and the smell of oil blossomed. The thing pulled back as if smoke were hands. "Now," Whitaker said for real. We were men again, not boys in a story. We pushed out, fast and ugly, 3 bodies against something that had nothing to do with bodies. The rain came in hard as we broke the line, washing our heat away. We kept our feet because we'd trained ourselves to choose stupid over dead. Doyle went left and I went right, and Ruiz stayed so close to me I could feel his arm hair on my sleeve when he raised the pistol and fired once into a patch of night that was more night than the rest. It hit one of us then. Not with claw or tooth, don't make that of it, with cold. A wall of it, like stepping into a freezer that has never known power. Ruiz gasped and his knees went loose. I grabbed his belt. He was a small man, and in that moment he was heavy as a man twice his size because fear adds pounds to friendship. "Tomas," Isco shouted, and from the far side of the clearing Tomas answered, "Here." That word saved us. A human voice. A pin driven into a map. Something flicked along my cheek like a wet leaf dragged, and my ear popped as if pressure had changed. I swung the butt of my carbine because I did not know where the barrel should point. It hit nothing and something at the same time. The sound it made is a sound I have no analogy for. That is how I know I am telling you this plain. It was how a voice sounds when someone hangs up a phone on you mid-sentence. Empty and full in a breath. "Back!" Whitaker ordered. We did not argue. We fell back through the door and slammed the bar and stood there like men who have just loaded their last round into a rifle and are pretending they have a second clip. The nails in the eaves chimed once more, faint now, like someone had run a finger over them and smiled. We counted, not 1 through 5. We counted shoulders, breathing, places where heat collected in a room. We were 4, then we were 3. "Where's Doyle?" I asked, stupid, as if the question weren't a spear I'd just thrown into the middle of the floor. The silence that followed was not just us listening. It was the house listening to us. He had gone left and I had gone right, and the thing had come down and through, and the smoke had pinned it, and then we had run, and in all that, a man can be shuffled like a card and dropped under a table. Isco told us to wait 1 long breath, and then 2, and then 3. A length of time dictated by a history I could feel in my bones. And then we opened the door again, in a slow arc, like we were showing the world we were not afraid of it. The clearing was not empty. Doyle lay just beyond the step, half in and half out of the rain, his carbine under him as if he had chosen to sleep by his rifle like a man in a bad photograph. He was not torn. He was not broken. He was wrong in weight when we lifted him. Men are supposed to weigh what they weigh. He did not. He felt like a bundle of new straw instead of a man full of blood. Ruiz touched his eyelid, and it did not twitch. We covered him with Whitaker's poncho and slid him inside, not because inside would make sense of anything, but because you do not leave a friend on the ground. Ruiz checked him again, because that is what hands do when the mind doesn't want to know. He shook his head and then, only then, whispered something to a saint he did not owe anything. We waited through what was left of the night without the lamp. We watched the doorway until the darkness grew gray, and the gray grew faces, and the faces were trees and roofs, and the muddy strap of the dike running off toward a cluster of houses that had not asked for any of us and had gotten more than they wanted. At dawn, Tomas and Lito went out with long poles and moved them ahead of themselves like men parting tall grass to find snakes. They tapped the posts, counted under their breath, and then went to fetch Isco's elder uncle, who did not believe in any of this. but who had a way of standing that made boys like me find their boots before he asked us to. We took Doyle out under a stand of banana and said words that men say when there are no words that fit. We did not have a chaplain, so Whitaker read from a little book he carried that had been his wife's gift before he shipped out. It was not the right book for our situation. It was the only one we had. We tucked the boy's dog tags back into his shirt and folded his hands and covered his face. I kept expecting the cold of the night to follow us into the morning, but the sun stepped up and did its duty, and I was grateful to it in a way I had never been grateful to the sun before. That same morning, the soldier from the other side came back, not to ask for anything, and not to bring trouble, but to stand a little distance away and bow once. He wore a clean bandage on his wrist. He put his hand to the line of our posts and did not cross it. He counted them with his eyes. Then he turned and went. I found myself respecting him in a very particular, uncomfortable way that made me quieter than usual the rest of the day. If I had been in charge, I might have called it quits then, but I wasn't, and anyway, the world doesn't turn on a man's wishes. We had to move the radio. The set was a magnet for attention, and the clearing was getting the kind of attention no one wants. We packed it while the women cooked the rice. Us men wouldn't eat for hours because our throats weren't sure they remembered how to swallow. We set out along the higher path to a hut that overlooked a stretch of paddies like a front row seat. The rain came back like an old friend you don't like much. It slapped our faces and made the world smell clean and new over the rot. We walked single file, Isco first, me second, because I wanted to feel the set against my spine in case the night got ideas. Behind me, Whitaker, then Ruiz with his kit in a bag that had seen too many miles. We were halfway when the world shifted. In that way you can't measure with a compass. The frog stopped. There is a sound the jungle makes when it is paying attention to you, and we walked into it like men into a conversation. The path ahead bent and then straightened and then bent again, and between those bends stood a lantern burning that cold bright that looked like something you wanted and would regret. "Which is the right one?" Whitaker asked without asking. He meant which of the bends. He meant which of the lights. He meant which of the voices we might hear next would be human. I did not have any answers, only habits, so I put my hand back and tapped the metal of the set. Tap, tap. Ruiz did the same to the iron buckle on his kit bag. Isco stooped and scooped wet earth and pinched it between finger and thumb and flicked it to the path's edge as if he were telling someone he knew we were coming and they needed to step back behind their own line. "Left," Isco said. He did not explain. We went left. The lantern did not move, which was the first right thing it had done. Then a voice from the right curve said, "Carter," and it sounded like my mother and like the sergeant who had done my intake and like a girl from high school who had laughed with her head thrown back. I nearly wept with the wave of homesick that broke over me. I did not step toward it, because that would have meant I was the only one who wanted to, and I am a coward when my friends need me not to be. We made the hut just before full dark. It had already housed men like us and men not like us, and that meant it had the right scars, nails in the lintel, a groove worn in the step by a foot that had always found the same spot, a line of salted dirt that looked like a spill and was not. I set the radio in a corner and wiped it with my dry cloth as if that would make it less visible to anything hunting brightness. Whitaker set the new countersign on my palm like a coin. Mackerel, string, and I nodded like it made as much sense as any of our little rituals. That night we fought again. There is no other word for it. It did not come into the hut. It pushed the hut around us like a hand testing the firmness of bread. Nails rang. The smoke sulked along the floorboards and then decided to go to work and rolled out in a stubborn cloud that made me think of men with their sleeves rolled and their shoulders set. We fired once and twice at the shadow, making weight where the roof joined wall. It recoiled like something that hadn't expected to be proved wrong, which is a feeling so human it made my heart lurch. A shape crowded the doorway with the exact height and stance of Doyle. It did not speak. It did not need to. Whitaker's breath caught audibly and then steadied again the way a good man's will. He said, "Safe," to himself, and the shape uncoiled and left a dampness on the threshold like something had dragged a wet sleeve there. Ruiz threw his last moldy ration biscuit at it because it was what he had to throw, and we laughed, all of us, at the exact wrong moment in the exact right way. When dawn came, we found prints that went to the line where the posts had been set and stopped, heels sunk like a man leaning away from an order he doesn't want to obey. We also found, far off and wrong, a place where men had carried a body under a tarp and left it for other men to find. The tarp had been pulled back and laid neatly aside. The body was gone. No blood, no struggle, just the neat rectangle where a man-sized weight had pressed the ground and then decided gravity was a suggestion. We went back to the safe house because you always go home after a fight, even when home is a place that will never be the way you first saw it. The barrio was quiet in that way that says sound is hiding behind the next breath. Old men sat where they always sat and did not pretend to whittle anything. Women scrubbed pots that did not need scrubbing. Children stayed out of sight like little birds gone to ground. Whitaker asked Isco a question, only with his eyes. "Is this the place we must stand, or can we go?" Isco answered the same way. "It is the place, and so be it." That night before the rain, we did one more thing. Not a ritual. Work. We broke down doors and rebuilt them with iron in the hinges and on the bar. We salted the thresholds like careless cooks. We set posts not in a circle, but in a number that made no sense to anything that could count. We set a pot on the coals and fed it bits of coconut until the smoke made the air sweet and oily. We lay our dead Doyle, wrapped and tagged, waiting for a lull that might never come. And we said to the dark with our bodies that it would not have him again because there is such a thing as stubbornness, and Americans are not the only ones who know it. It came anyway. Of course it did. The first we knew of it was the smell of fish grilled at dusk. It came so rich I could taste salt. My mouth watered and then my jaw clenched because there was no charcoal lit in a kilometer. Then the voice tried again. Not a name this time, not a trick with ranks and numbers. It tried a laugh. A small crack of sound like a match. Doyle's laugh. It hurt. It hurt Whitaker in a way that showed on his face like a shadow. He leaned a hand on the door, and for a second the weight of this caught up to him, and I saw the Ohio farm boy under the sergeant's map. Then he pinched his cheek and got small and hard again, and the moment passed. "Countersign," the roof said. "Mackerel," Whitaker answered evenly. "String," the wall returned. "Safe." Isco laid over it like a mercy. It didn't like the smoke that night. It pressed against it and the smoke held. Ruiz fanned harder with a broken palm leaf, and the look on his face was something between prayer and profanity. I held the radio case and tapped, and in the tapping I heard the sound my father made when he checked the fence around our little garden back in Bakersfield. A ring of iron and intention he knew would keep rabbits out, not because rabbits respected it, but because he did. And sometimes that is enough to bend a world a fraction. It hit us once more with cold. It ran through the door, and I felt it pass through my knees like someone opened a basement door inside my bones. I swore I heard, faint and far, somebody say my name like they loved me, and that almost did for me more than anything else that night. Ruiz yanked me by the belt back into the land of the living. He yelped, and I thought he'd caught a nail. He hadn't. The cold had laid a hand on his chest. He looked at me with eyes that wanted to be anywhere else but refused to leave, and he said, in a voice I will hear till I go, "Hold." We did, and then with a sound that was not a sound, it was gone. Outside, the frogs remembered their song like a man remembering the lyrics after a long drink. The rain came soft, then harder, scrubbing the world. "Roll call," Whitaker said, "because we were soldiers, and there are things you say and do when the unknown tries to unmake you." We answered. He did not ask for Doyle. He did not say the boy's name. He went over to the poncho bundle and stood very straight and set his hand on it like he was saying good night to a child who had to get up early. We found Ruiz in the morning by the woodpile, sitting with his back against a post, eyes open at nothing. He had been breathing when we opened up for dawn. He was not, now. There was a dusting of salt on his knees like flour. His hands were warm from where the sun had found them. I took his kit and buckled it and put it under his arm and told myself it mattered to pack a man for his last journey, even when the road is one you cannot walk with him. We buried him beside the place where the schoolyard used to be a schoolyard, and not a place men mark their beginnings and endings. I said his name out loud and felt something loosen inside my chest that had been bound tight since my feet first hit this island. Whitaker spoke not as a sergeant, but as a man whose hands were too big for the gentleness he wanted. Isco said a word that means both sorry and gratitude in the mountain tongue, and I have never known which part of that word fit best. There were Japanese dead to mark that morning, too. Not ours. The ones the dawn had shown us near the dike, covered with a tarp we recognized, and hands laid in a way that meant somebody cared for them even if they hadn't loved them. We made a place for them that would not wash away in the first rain. We set the 3-stone sign that meant go gently. We left a piece of cloth tied to a post where men who came in quiet could find it. None of this made sense in the ledger of war. All of it made sense in the ledger of being a man. We wrote a report that did not include lanterns that burned cold or voices that borrowed our childhoods. We wrote about patrol routes and scrape marks and indications of enemy movement. We wrote, without knowing it, a story that would be understood by the people who had to understand it and could be ignored by the people who could not. Then we set another pot on the coals, because the smell of smoke in a kitchen is as old as fear. When we left that barrio weeks later, we did not look back. That is a lie. I looked back 3 times between the safe house and the turn in the path where you cannot see the eaves anymore, no matter how you squint. On the steps stood Tomas and Lito and Isco and the older uncle who did not believe for company. They raised hands the way men raise them when they do not want to wave, because waving invites the attention of things that like the shape of a hand. We tapped the metal of the truck door when we climbed in. Tap, tap, a habit already. The set hummed under my fingers. The strap I had repaired with a strip of GI belt cut into my shoulder, and I was glad for it because it meant I could feel something ordinary. Whitaker sat with his boots carefully not touching the rice sacks we had stacked to protect the radio from bumps. He held his helmet in his hands like a bowl. He watched the road. He did not say the names of the men we were leaving under the banana trees. He did not have to. I said them in my head because somebody had to keep that list from going to sleep. Corporal Edward Doyle, Technician 5th grade Miguel Ruiz. Their faces did not hold still. They never do after. The war went on as wars do. We took other roads. We made other lines in the dirt that meant things. I fixed more sets than I care to recall. I cut my hand on a rusty hinge and spent a week with a fever that cut my legs out from under me and dreamed of a laugh like a match. I went home and learned to put a suit on and drive to a job where nobody asked me to count posts before they came in the door. I married. I did not have children. These are facts I will not explain and do not fully understand, and none of it is your business unless I choose to make it so. This is a taped confession only because my granddaughter set the machine on the coffee table and pressed the little red circle and told me she wanted my stories. She meant the ones that begin with baseball games in Manila and end with ice cream for anybody who could show a dog tag from home. I have those stories. They make a room warm. They are true. This is also true. Sometimes I leave a little plate of rice on the inside of my back door. I do it because it makes me think of kindness. I do it because it costs me nothing. I do it because when I do not, my sleep has holes in it. Sometimes when I am very tired or very alone, I tap the iron head of the rake that leans by the stoop when I go out to pick tomatoes. Tap, tap. It is not a prayer. It is not a rule. It is a way of talking to a night that has forgotten my name and will not borrow it again if I can help it. I do not say the word the villagers would have used if they used any word at all. I never learned it. I knew what I knew. There was a feeder in the dark that liked to come close to human heat, and it learned our edges better than we knew them ourselves, and it could be annoyed by stubbornness and iron and the smoke of a kitchen that had been cooking since men first found fire. I learned that if you count wrong on purpose, sometimes the night stumbles. I learned that a good man can stand between a thing and a child and not always win and not always lose. I learned, too, that enemies are sometimes men who sit down a respectful distance and count the same posts you do, and bow a little because everybody's dead must make their way home. I am an old man now. My knees complain when the rain considers the question. My hands make more mistakes than they used to on a radio I do not have anymore. I do not speak of this often, not because I am ashamed, though I am ashamed of things I did and of things I failed to do, but because the world prefers its stories with the sharp corners sanded off and the monsters shaped like something you can point to on a drawing. I can point to a rice paddy in my head. I can point to a stand of bamboo that knocks in the wind. I can point to a boy's laugh that I will hear when it is very quiet here, and my back door, left just so, lets the night in like a cat. I can touch a small iron thing in my pocket and feel steadier than I have any right to. I can say the names: Edward Doyle, Miguel Ruiz. I can tell you that they were brave in the way brave men are, not because they did not fear, but because they swallowed the fear and stood anyway. And I can tell you that there are things a war does not teach you to fight, and that you fight them anyway, with whatever gentle tools a village puts in your hands, and with whatever hard ones your country gave you, and with the stubbornness of men who have promises to keep to boys they buried once under banana leaves where the dirt smells like morning after rain. If any of this sounds like a story to you, that is not my fault. It is only that I have learned to speak gently of something that was not.